So in this session now, we are going to be discussing about another chapter from your other laws, interpretation of statutes. Interpretation of statutes, unlike General Clauses Act, it is not a law. We are not learning any act, we are not learning a law. These are just a set of principles which the court has been following since years and years. So they've become a custom, and now it is implied that every judge, every court will be following these points which we will be learning over here. But this is not any law, this is not any act. They are just customs which the courts have been following since years and years, and now they've become a sort of a law. Okay, now here we will be learning several principles that how do we read a law. See, we know for a fact that law is a dynamic paper. It keeps changing. Now, every time there is an amendment, every time a new law is made, after you qualify, you're not going to sit in class. You're not going to sit in class again and again to learn the new law. So, you should know as a professional how to read the law and how to understand it on your own. And that is where this chapter comes in. It's going to tell us that how exactly do we read a law. This chapter is very similar to General Clauses Act. In that is what I mean is that just like how General Clauses Act had a lot of key words to remember, same way it's going to be even over here. Even this chapter, it's going to be more of a game of memory. So from that perspective, purely from examination perspective, we will be discussing this chapter in such a way that we are able to recall the right keywords at the right time in the examination. So that should be your objective as well over here. Even your objective should be trying to learn as much as possible with me in class, with extreme importance being given to keywords. Here the biggest problem of this chapter is Latin maxims. We will have several Latin maxims to learn and remember here. Okay, but apart from that, even this chapter, like General Clauses Act, it is just a game of memory. And I'll help you just as much as I helped you in General Clauses Act in learning this as much as possible right here in class. I am very sure General Clauses Act, if I'm going to ask you any definition or any concept, you will be able to tell me right now, because that's how we did the session, right? You must have done quite a lot of learning with me in class. The same way, exact same way, we are going to be doing interpretation of statutes. Even over here, your objective should be the same, to learn as much as possible with me, because a lot of keywords. So even over here, we will have a lot of hints, we will have a lot of mnemonics, and we will use tips and techniques to memorize the concepts. All right, we will start with some basic things. First of all, what do you mean by statute? A statute, the definition, what do you mean by statute? A statute is a written will of the legislature, solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as a law of the state. Let us try to understand it. It is the written will of the legislature. First of all, it is in writing. Statute, nothing but a law. Obviously, it is in writing. And it is written by whom, guys? Who is making the law? The legislature. When I say legislature, I am referring to the parliament. I am referring to the union government. I am referring to the parliament. So the statute is a written will of the legislature, which means it is written by the legislature, solemnly expressed in necessary form. Necessary form indicates there is a certain way in which a law is made. Any act you see, it will have sections. Those sections will be divided into smaller subsections. Those subsections will be divided into smaller clauses. Those clauses will be subdivided into smaller subclauses. You're understanding? When I say necessary form indicates that there's a format in which any act is made. Any act you see, it starts with the preamble. Section 1 will tell us the preliminary, the commencement, the applicability, the short title, the extent. And then after the act is over, it will be followed with some schedules. This is a format in which any act is made. Every act is made. So it is expressed in necessary form to constitute it as law of the state, which means now the statute will become the law of the land. Now the statute will become the law of the land, which you and I, everybody, we have to follow. It becomes the law of the land. So statute is a written will of the legislature, solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as the law of the state. Again, guys, learn up along with me. What is a statute? It is a written will of the legislature, solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as law of the state. Again, it is a written will of the legislature solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as law of the state. Understood, guys? It is written will. It is written will of the legislature. Who is the legislature? The parliament. It is solemnly expressed in necessary form. Necessary form indicates there's a format in which every law is made. Every law is made in the same format. So it follows a specific format. It becomes the law of the state. Law of the state means it becomes the law of the land which everybody has to follow. See, we cannot give the excuse that we were not aware of the law. Ignorantia juris non excusat, right? Ignorance of law is not an excuse. I cannot give the excuse that I was not aware of the law. Once it becomes a law of the state, once it becomes a law of the land, everybody has to follow. Here, when I say state, I'm not referring to state government. Here, when I refer to state, I'm referring to the entire country. I'm referring to the entire land. Okay, so one last time, tell me the definition of statute. Try telling me without seeing what is a statute. It is a written will of the legislature solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as the law of the state. It is written will of the legislature solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as the law of the state. Understood, everybody? Yes. Now listen to my next discussion. If you look at our Indian constitution, but we do not use the word statute. Instead, we use the word law. And what do you mean by law? The definition of law has 6 components, and the hint to help us remember the 6 components is born. B stands for bylaw, O stands for ordinance order, R stands for rule regulation, N stands for notification. Law includes bylaw, order ordinance, rule regulation, notification. Got it, guys? So what is statute? Statute is a written will of the legislature solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as the law of the state. I hope it's in your memory. Then we learned, but Indian constitution doesn't use the word statute. Instead, it uses the word law. And what is law? Bylaws, order, ordinance, rules, regulation, notification. Again, guys, bylaws, order, ordinance, rules, regulations, notification. One last time, what is law? Bylaw, order, ordinance, rule, regulation, notification. Okay. Now listen to my next discussion. What do you mean by document? Now, document is something which we have already learned in General Clauses Act. If you remember, we said that we will ask ourselves 4 questions: what, where, how, why. And that will give us the definition of document. Try to recall what we learned. We said document includes matter written, expressed, described, where, upon any substance, how, using letters, figures, and marks to be used for recording that matter. So we already know what a document is. Here, I just want you to understand the elements of document. All this you can skip because you've already learned what is document. We just have to learn over here the elements of document. What are the main elements of a document? The elements of a document, the hint will be Mrs. Matter, record, substance, means. First of all, main element of the document is a matter, and that matter is recorded by writing it, expressing it, or describing it. Remember, written, expressed, described. Upon any substance. And means. Means is nothing but how. Here the word means refers to how. How are we going to record it? Using letters, figures, marks, using any permanent form. So there are 4 main elements of a document. Number 1, matter. Number 2, record. Number 3, substance. And number 4, means. What are the 4 elements, guys? Matter, record, substance, means. Once again, MMRS, Mrs. Matter, record, substance, means. Okay, 2 M's, matter and means, and then record and substance. Matter means, record, substance. Matter means, record, substance. Okay, so first of all, we learnt about statute. Try to recall what is statute. Statute is a written will of the legislature solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as the law of the state. Then we learnt Indian constitution does not use the word statute. Instead, it uses the word law. And what is law, guys? Law includes 6 things. Our hint was born, bylaws, order, ordinance, rules, regulations, notifications. Again, bylaws, order, ordinance, rules, regulations, and notifications. Okay, then after that we discussed about after that we also spoke about what do we mean by document. Document, we said, is the same definition that we learned on the General Clauses Act. We just have to learn the elements of document. The hint is Mrs. Matter, means, record, and substance. Matter, means, record, and substance. Okay, then after this, coming to our next discussion, instrument. Listen, instrument includes, what is an instrument? It is a document by which, instrument is a document by which any right or liability is steered. Any right or liability is created, transferred, extended, extinguished, recorded. Like, for example, if you look at a property sale paper, it's a document, it's an instrument, right? It is an instrument. And through that instrument, you're creating a title for me. You're transferring your ownership to me. You take a check, even a check, through a check, you are accepting that you're liable to pay me money. You're creating a right for me to collect money from you. So, an instrument is any document. Which document indicates to us, guys? It has to be in writing, right? Instrument indicates to us, a document indicates to us, it has to be in writing. So instrument includes document by which any right or liability is created, transferred, extended, extinguished, or recorded. Please remember all the 5 words: created, transferred, extended, extinguished, and recorded. It is a formal legal document by which a right is created or a fact is recorded. So, what is an instrument? An instrument includes every document through which any right or liability is created, transferred, extended, extinguished, or recorded. Is it in the memory, guys? Document by which any right or liability is created, transferred, extended, extinguished, recorded. It's a formal legal document which creates a right or records a fact. It either creates a right or records a fact. This is extremely important. I want you to spend a little extra time over here and learn up this definition right away. Come on, guys. What is instrument? Instrument includes every document by which any right or liability is created, transferred, extended, extinguished, recorded. It is a formal legal document which creates a right or records a fact. Which creates a right or records a fact. Okay. Now listen. In India, instrument and deed, these 2 words are used interchangeably. So in India, there is no major difference. We can use these 2 words interchangeably. Till here was the first part of our chapter, totally not connected to interpretation of statutes, which you're going to majorly learn this point onwards. Till now, we've just learned about 4 special points: what is a statute, what is document, what is an instrument, and what are deeds. I'll give you a minute. Could you quickly run through the definitions one last time on your own? Take your material one last time on your own. Just run through the definitions, say and see the definitions, see if you recall. Make sure every keyword is in your memory. I'll give you exactly 2 minutes and then I'll take you to the next part of the discussion. Are we done, guys? Are we confident about the concept still here? Yes. One last time, will you tell me without saying all the four definitions? First we discussed about statute. We said statute is a written will of the legislature, solemnly expressed in necessary form to constitute it as law of the state. Then we discussed about law. Law, we said in our constitution we don't use the word statute, we use the word law. And what's the definition of law? Law includes extensive definition. Law includes bond, bylaws, order, ordinance, rules, regulations, notifications. Okay, so that was the second definition. Second definition about law. Third definition we said document, but document we already learned, so we just learned the elements of document. Mrs. M, what was M? M was matter. Another M, means. Then R, record. And S, substance. Finally we learned about instrument. We said instrument is nothing but a document which by which any right or liability is created, transferred, extended, extinguished, or recorded. A document by which any right or liability is created, transferred, extended, extinguished, or recorded. Also, please don't forget that in India, this word deed and this word instrument, they are used interchangeably. Okay, now we enter into the core discussion of this chapter. Okay, first of all, what do you mean by interpretation? Interpretation is a process followed by whom? Interpretation is a process followed by courts to find what? To find M, I, to find the meaning of the act and the intention of the legislature in enacting it. See, we've got to understand that the person who made the law is different and the person who is actually applying the law is different. Long ago in 1872, they made the Contract Act. But even today, we have cases relating to Indian Contract Act. So the judges have to interpret the law. The judges have to step into the shoes of the lawmaker and they have to think from the perspective of the lawmaker that what was the intention of the lawmaker? Why did he make this law? Why did he put this provision? So interpretation is this process. This process by which the courts are trying to find the meaning of the act and the intention of the legislature in enacting it. What is interpretation? Interpretation is a process by which the courts ascertain the meaning of the act and the intention of the lawmaker in enacting it. Again, guys, what is interpretation? It is a process by which the courts ascertain the meaning of the act and the intention of the legislature in enacting it. It is a process by which who? Courts. Courts ascertain what? Tell me the two key words, guys. M, meaning. I, intention. M, meaning. I, intention. Okay, now why do we need interpretation? Like how I just told you, two different agencies are involved. The legislature, the parliament, the government is making the law, but the judiciary, the court, is applying the law. So the bridge between the two is interpretation. Through interpretation, the judiciary, the court, steps into the shoes of the parliament, steps into the shoes of the legislature and tries to find the real intention of the lawmaker, tries to find what was the intention of the lawmaker behind putting that particular provision. So why do we need interpretation? It is the bridge between the two agencies. It is a link between the legislature on one side and the court, the judiciary on the other side. Okay, guys, till here did we understand what is interpretation? Interpretation is a process by which the courts ascertain the meaning of the act and the intention of the lawmaker in making the act. Once again, it is a process by which the courts ascertain the meaning of the act and the intention of the lawmaker. Okay, now listen, guys, there are different kinds of interpretation. What are the different kinds of interpretation? Number one, we have legal interpretation, and number two, we have doctrinal interpretation. Legal interpretation may either be authentic or it may be usual. Legal interpretation may be authentic or usual, and doctrinal interpretation may be grammatical or logical. One by one, we will discuss. Our first focus will be on legal interpretation. What are we learning? The different kinds of interpretation. Okay, listen. When we say legal interpretation, here the judge is bound. The judge is not free here, he is bound. The law itself is telling him how to interpret, and he has to interpret like that only. In legal interpretation, there is a rule of law which is binding the judge to interpret the law in a particular manner. Understood, guys? In legal interpretation, he's not free. He cannot think out of the box. He cannot be creative. In legal interpretation, the law itself is telling him how to interpret the law, and he has to interpret the law in that manner only. The law itself is telling him, the law itself is giving him the rule how to interpret, and he has to interpret. He's bound. He has to interpret in that particular manner only. That is legal interpretation. Now, this legal interpretation may be authentic or it may be usual. When we say authentic, what I mean is that this rule of law, how to interpret, this rule of law is given by the legislator itself. That is the parliament. When they made the law, in the law itself, the parliament said how to interpret. Like, for example, they've given the definitions in the act itself. Now, how to define that word is given in the act itself. I cannot look anywhere else. So, in authentic interpretation, how to interpret that rule of law, how to interpret, that is given in the act itself. It's given by the legislator itself. Usual. See, wherever we use the word usual, usual comes from the word usage. And you know, usage means custom. In our in our special contracts chapter, we've discussed this. Usage is nothing but customs. So, usual means here the rule of law, how to interpret the law, is not mentioned in the law. It is not mentioned by the lawmaker. Instead, we have customs and case laws. So there are customs, there is a certain manner in which we have been interpreting a particular point. Now we have to continue to follow that manner. It has become the custom now. Or there is a particular case in which the judge explained how to interpret. Now we've got to follow that. So when we say legal interpretation, the court is not free, the judge is not free, the judge is bound. There is a rule of law which is telling the judge how to interpret the law. Now the judge has to follow that process only. The judge has to follow that rule only. In authentic interpretation, that rule of law, that how to interpret, that rule is given in the legislator, by the legislator itself. It's given in the law itself. In usual interpretation, that rule of law, how to interpret, is not given in the law. Instead, we will take it from the customs, we will take it from the case laws. Okay, but in doctrinal interpretation, the judge is free. His objective is do whatever, just find the real and true meaning of the act. He can do anything. He can even deviate from the act. His objective is to find the real and the true meaning of the act. That is doctrinal interpretation. Did you understand, guys? In legal interpretation, he is bound. In legal interpretation, there is a rule of law which is telling him how to interpret. In authentic interpretation, that rule of law is given by the legislator in the law itself. In usual interpretation, that rule of law is given to him by customs and case law. But in doctrinal interpretation, he is free. He has to somehow find the real and true meaning of the statute. This doctrinal interpretation may be grammatical, may be logical. First, he will try grammatical. In grammatical, he will try to find the meaning of the law using the words which are given in the law. He will see what is the ordinary meaning of that word which is given in the law. And with that ordinary meaning, he will try to find the intention of the lawmaker, the meaning of the law. But in case this grammatical interpretation is not making sense, then he can do logical interpretation. In logical interpretation, the court is ignoring the words which are given in the statute. See, in grammatical interpretation, the court tried to find the meaning using the words which are given in the statute. The court tried to find the meaning using the ordinary meaning of the words which are given in the statute. But that meaning is vague, that meaning is ambiguous, let us say. Then in that case, the court can try logical interpretation. In logical interpretation, the court is fully free. The court can ignore the words of the law. The court can depart from the words of the law and can try to find the intention of the lawmaker from some other way. In logical interpretation, the court is not sticking to the words of the law. The law is saying something. The court is not sticking to it. Instead, the court is deviating from here. And in other places, the court is trying to find the meaning of the law. For example, the court is trying to find the meaning in some other law. Or the court is trying to find the meaning from a foreign case. Or the court is trying to find the meaning from some research papers. From other places, court is trying to find the law. The law's words, the words which are used in the law are not helping him. That is logical interpretation. Understood, guys? So, legal interpretation and doctrinal interpretation. We have two broad categories of interpretation. In legal interpretation, what I do is here the court is bound, here the judge is bound, here the judge will have to do the interpretation on the basis of a rule of law, and that rule of law is given to us by this rule of law is going to bind the judge. The judge doesn't have a choice. The judge has to do the interpretation only on the basis of that rule of law. Okay, but then this legal interpretation may be authentic or usual. In authentic, that rule of law, that how to interpret that rule, is given by the legislator itself in the law itself. In usual interpretation, that rule of law, how to interpret, is given in some custom or in some case law. In doctrinal interpretation, the court is free, the judge is free. His objective is to do something, to look somewhere and find the real and true meaning of the statute. He can see anywhere, he can look, he can see, he can find it from anywhere. He is supposed to find the real and true meaning of the statute. Okay, this doctrinal may be grammatical or logical. First, he will try to do grammatical interpretation, where he will try to find the meaning of the act using the words which are given in the act itself. He will try to give the ordinary rules of speech. He will use the normal, usual rules of grammar. He will see the ordinary meaning of the words, and with that, he will try to find the meaning of the statute. But if that is vague or ambiguous, then he will try logical interpretation. In logical interpretation, he will go beyond the words. In logical interpretation, he will not restrict himself to the words which are used in the statute. In logical interpretation, he will try to find the true intention of the lawmaker from other sources. He will deviate from the statute, and from other sources, he will try to find the meaning of the lawmaker. Understood, guys? So this was our discussion on the types of interpretation. I hope we understood it properly. Legal, authentic, usual, doctrinal, grammatical, logical. Okay, then there is one more classification of interpretation, one more categories of interpretation. This was given by Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald said that there are two kinds of interpretation. Number one, we have literal interpretation, and number two, we have functional interpretation. In literal interpretation, I stick to the literature. In literal interpretation, I do not look beyond literaliges. Literaliges refers to literature. In literal interpretation, I just use the literature. Literature refers to the words which are used in the law. I do not look at anything else. I just read the words of the law, and with that itself, I try to find the meaning of the words and the intention of the lawmaker. But in functional interpretation, I depart from the letter of the law. Letter of the law means what? Letter of the law means words of the law. I am ignoring the words of the law, and I am trying to find the spirit of the law from other sources. What we learned under logical interpretation, that is functional interpretation. What we learned under grammatical interpretation, that is literal interpretation. In literal interpretation, I am sticking to the words of the law, and from that itself, I am trying to find the meaning of the law. I'm restricting myself to the words of the law, and from that itself, I'm trying to find the real meaning of the law and the intention of the lawmaker. But in functional interpretation, key word, guys, I am departing from the letter of the law, which means I'm deviating the letter of the law. I'm ignoring the words which are used in the law, and I'm going to try and find the real intention of the lawmaker. I'm going to try and find the spirit of the lawmaker from some other source. Okay, but listen, quote. You should not straightaway jump to functional interpretation. You should always, first of all, try to rely on the words which are used in the statute. You must always take the letter of the law as the exclusive and conclusive evidence of the spirit of the law. Important, you must always accept the letter of the law to be exclusive and conclusive evidence of the spirit of the law. What does this even mean? Are you able to understand this? See, this means that when you're reading the law, your first intention should be to find the real meaning using the words of the law itself. Because the words which are used in the law are an evidence of the intention of the lawmaker. Letter of the law means words of the law. Spirit of the law means intention of the lawmaker. So generally speaking, usually the letters, the words which are used in the law, they are a proof, they are an evidence of the intention of the lawmaker. So ideally, you should try to find the intention of the lawmaker just using the words of the law, that is literal interpretation. Only when literal interpretation is ambiguous, vague, meaningless, not making sense, only then you look beyond. Only then you depart from the letter of the law and try to find the spirit of the law from other sources. Otherwise, generally, you should stick to the letter of the law. You should treat the letter of the law as the exclusive and conclusive evidence, of the spirit of the law. You should use the letter of the law as the exclusive and conclusive evidence of the spirit of the law. Crystal clear with this also, guys? Yes, so under interpretation, we first of all learned about the meaning of interpretation. We said interpretation is a process followed by the courts to ascertain the meaning of the act and the intention of the lawmaker. Right? Then after that, what else did we study? After that, we discussed that importance of interpretation. We said interpretation is a bridge between the two agencies. It is a bridge between, on one side, the legislature who made the law, and the other side, the judiciary, the court who is applying the law. Then we learned the different kinds of interpretation. First, we said legal and doctrinal interpretation, and then we said literal and functional interpretation. Can I take you to the next discussion now? Our next discussion is going to be the differences between interpretation and construction. If you remember, in the General Clauses Act, we came across the word construction, guys. We said preamble is an aid to construction. I told you over there that construction is not building construction. This word construction comes from the word construe, and construe means to interpret. So guys, interpretation and construction, very often they are used synonymously. They are used interchangeably, but actually there's a very thin line of difference between interpretation and construction. Practically, you will not be able to say where interpretation ends and where construction starts. But theoretically, there's a thin line of difference between the two. In interpretation, I look at the ONG meaning. I look at the ordinary natural grammatical meaning, and I try to find I try to interpret. I try to understand the law using that ordinary natural grammatical meaning only. I see the words. I see what's the meaning of the words. With that meaning itself, I try to find the meaning of the law. But if that ordinary natural grammatical meaning is ambiguous, then I cannot stick to that. In that case, I will have to find the meaning from other sources, that is construction. You're understanding? In interpretation, I am sticking to the ordinary natural grammatical meaning. I am sticking to the plain meaning. But in case the plain meaning, in case the meaning is not plain, in case the meaning is ambiguous, in case the meaning is giving rise to doubts, if the meaning is vague, then I will try to find the intention of the lawmaker from other sources, guys. That is construction. So in simple words, if the law is simple, if the law is unambiguous, if the law is clear, then I don't have to look at anything else. If the law is simple, if the law is clear, then I will try to find the meaning of the law from the words in the statute itself. That is interpretation. But when those words are ambiguous, when those words are giving rise to doubts, in that case, I cannot restrict myself to the meaning, to the words which are given in the statute. In that case, I'll have to deviate from the letter of the law. I'll have to look at other sources to find the spirit of the law, and that is construction. So when I'm sticking to the words of the law, it is interpretation. But when I look elsewhere, because the words of the law are not plain, if I'm looking elsewhere, then it becomes construction. Understood, everybody? Yes, so practically you will not be able to say where interpretation ends and where construction starts. But theoretically, there is a thin line of difference between the two. In interpretation, I am sticking to just the words of the statute. I am looking at the plain, ordinary, natural, grammatical meaning. With that itself, I am trying to find the intention of the lawmaker, the meaning of the act. But if that plain ordinary natural grammatical meaning is not simple. If it is ambiguous, if it is giving rise to doubt, I have to look at the meaning in other sources, and that is construction. All right, I'll give you a minute. Could you quickly read through interpretation versus construction? Just quickly run through it once, please. The difference between interpretation and construction, please mark it important for your upcoming examination. Done, guys? Are we clear with this discussion? Yes, so until now, under interpretation, we have learnt about the meaning of interpretation. We've learnt that why do we need interpretation, the importance of interpretation, the different types of interpretation, and now we learnt the difference between interpretation and construction. Now, listen, guys, our next discussion, why do we need interpretation? See, we've got to understand that law is expressed using words, using language, and no language is perfect. In every language, there are n number of ambiguities. There are a lot of doubts. When we're writing a sentence, we mean something, but the person who's reading that sentence may not interpret that sentence in the same meaning which we intended, right? So there are multiple meanings to same words. The same word may mean different things in different contexts. So no language is perfect, and therefore obviously a defect will arise. There will be a doubt or an ambiguity will arise. And whenever this defect arises, whenever this ambiguity arises, okay, we cannot blame the lawmaker. That lawmaker, what kind of a law did you make? In that case, the judge has to now get to work and he has to interpret. How will he interpret? He will interpret using LCM. He will interpret using the language of the statute. He will consider the social conditions which were existing when the law was made, and he will see what was the mischief. Mischief here refers to the problem. What was the problem to solve which the new law was made? What was the problem to rectify which the new law was made? So, whenever we are reading a statute, there will be defects, there will be ambiguities, they are unavoidable. Whenever an ambiguity arises, whenever a defect arises, in all those cases, we cannot blame the draftsman. We cannot simply blame the lawmaker that what kind of a law did you make? All right. So that is why you should remember that in such cases, whenever an ambiguity arises, the judge has to start interpreting the law. And to interpret the law, he will use three things. When I say language of the statute, I refer to the words of the statute. When we say consideration of social conditions, I mean that what was the situation in our country? What was the economic situation in our country when the law was made? At that time, what was the demand of the people of the country? What was the problem that they were facing? The problem that they were facing is a mischief. What was the problem? To solve that problem only, the law was made. Like, for example, right now, cryptocurrencies are totally unregulated. And that is why a lot of people are losing a lot of money because of crypto. People are getting cheated, people are getting defrauded. So, because of crypto, they are actually also losing a lot of money. So, because of these reasons, the government is thinking of coming up with a law to regulate cryptocurrency. So, this is the mischief, this is a problem which is existing right now. To remedy this mischief, to solve this mischief, to solve this problem, the government is going to come up with a law. So, the judge is going to find the intention of the lawmaker. How? He is going to find the intention of the lawmaker using number one, the language of the statute, that is the words of the statute. Number two, he's going to consider the social conditions that were existing when the law was made. And number three, he will find the mischief that was to be remedied. On the basis of this, he will try to find the intention of the lawmaker and the meaning of the act. With this, he will give force and life. Force and life means he will try to find the intention of the law. Okay, then coming back to grammatical interpretation, we've already discussed about grammatical interpretation a little bit if you remember. We're going to learn about the same thing a little bit deeper now. In grammatical interpretation, what we've already learned is that we will generally stick to the words of the law. In grammatical interpretation, we will try to see the ordinary meaning of the law. Remember, we had seen under doctrinal interpretation, we had seen grammatical and logical. Here, under grammatical, we said that we will try to find the meaning of the statute using the ordinary meaning. Generally, what is the meaning of the words? Considering that, on the basis of that, I will try to find the intention of the lawmaker, the meaning of the law and all. But listen, no doubt, generally, we use the letter of the law as the conclusive and exclusive proof of the evidence of the law. But there are three situations where I can ignore the letter of the law. I can depart from the letter of the law. What are the three situations? Err. When the letter of the law is ambiguous, when the letter of the law is inconsistent, when the letter of the law is unreasonable. Understanding, guys? In such cases, I will ignore the letter of the law. In grammatical interpretation, what do I do? In grammatical interpretation, I try to find the meaning of the law. I try to interpret the law just using the words which are given in the law. I'm not looking at anything else. I am just seeing the words which are used in the law, using their ordinary meaning, the usual grammatical meaning, by applying the usual rules of speech, rules of grammar. On that basis, I'm trying to find the meaning of the law. And generally, we consider the letter of the law to be the exclusive and conclusive evidence of the spirit of the law. We know this. We've discussed about this. Letter of the law is nothing but the words which are used in the law. Spirit of the law is nothing but the intention of the lawmaker. So I find the intention of the lawmaker only using the words of the statute. But if the letter of the law is ambiguous, if the letter of the law is inconsistent, and if the letter of the law is unreasonable, in these three cases, I will not stick to the letter of the law. In these three cases, I will depart from the letter of the law and I will try to find the meaning of the law from some other sources. Got it, guys? So, this was another discussion under interpretation, grammatical interpretation in detail we studied.